On a damp Thursday evening in late 1978, Marlene Keating slid into the vinyl chair of a small salon tucked between a bakery and a shoe repair shop in Portland, Oregon, the kind of place where the front window was always fogged from the hair dryers and the smell of perm solution clung to your coat long after you left. She wasn't there for secrets. She was there because her bangs had grown into her eyes, and she had a company party on Saturday, and she wanted, for once, to look like her life wasn't held together by coffee and overtime. The bell over the door gave a tired chime as she entered, and the women inside barely looked up, only nodded with the practiced warmth of people who spent their days touching strangers' heads. The owner, a slim woman in her 30s with lacquered nails and a smile that never seemed to fully land, stepped forward like she'd been waiting for Marlene specifically, though Marlene had never been there before. "First time with us?" the woman asked, tying a cape around Marlene's neck with gentle efficiency. "You work downtown?" "I'm master." It was a normal question. Portland was small enough that downtown meant half the city's adult population. Marlene answered, without thinking. "Yeah, over by the river." "Oh, Federal Building side." "Or the other?" the woman asked, still smiling, still casual, as if she were choosing between two grocery stores. She didn't say Federal with emphasis. She said it like a local landmark. Marlene blinked. The woman hummed, pleased, and glanced at a clipboard that didn't seem to have any appointment notes on it, just blank lines and neat pencil ticks, like someone was counting time, not names. "And your husband, he travel much?" "Mine's always in and out. I can't keep track." The comb clicked softly through Marlene's hair. In the mirror, Marlene watched the owner's eyes, not on her face, but on the way her mouth moved, how quickly she answered, how easily she filled in the empty spaces. "Not my husband," Marlene said, half laughing. The owner's smile shifted, micro-adjusted, then returned. "Good for you. I tell my girls, independence is a blessing." With very does behind them, at the drying stations, another client was talking too loudly about a promotion and a new office badge, and a stylist with bleach-stained fingers responded with a string of sympathetic noises that sounded like gossip but landed like prompts. "So you'll be moving floors soon?" the stylist asked, as if it had already been mentioned. The client hesitated, then spilled details: which department, which corridor, what time the security guard changed shifts. The little frustrations people only confess in places they think are harmless. The salon absorbed it all the way. Carpet absorbs hair, quietly, greedily, without complaint. Marlene told herself it was nothing. But as the scissors began their steady rhythm near her ear, she realized the owner wasn't asking questions to be friendly. She was asking questions that were shaped to make you answer. And when Marlene's eyes met hers in the mirror, just for a second, the owner's expression didn't look curious. It looked like verification. A week later, Marlene told herself she was only going back because the cut was good, better than she expected, from a place with chipped tile and a coffee pot that tasted faintly of burnt paper. That was the rational story. The irrational one was that she hadn't been able to stop thinking about how the women in that salon listened. How the air itself seemed arranged to catch words and carry them to the right ears. The bell chimed again. Same tired note, and the same owner Irina, she'd learned from the little gold nameplate pinned to her blouse, looked up from behind the counter as if she'd been counting the seconds until Marlene returned. "Marlene," Irina said, too smoothly. Not honey, not sweetie. Her name, like it had been filed away somewhere. "Come in. You're right on time. Right on time." Marlene hadn't told anyone her lunch break started at 12:30. She'd simply walked in when she could. She sat, cape snapped around her neck, and the salon resumed its choreography. Dryers roaring, scissors clicking, women laughing a little too loudly in the front, A quieter conversation always happening in the back, where the mirrors didn't reach. That's when she noticed the order. Not the obvious order appointments, towels folded, bottles lined up, but a deeper one. A rhythm the place obeyed like a metronome. The same two stylists took the same stations. Every time. The same radio station played at the same volume, just loud enough to blur words into a private haze. The back door opened at predictable intervals, always when the dryers flared, always when the front bell would be masked. And each time the back door opened, the air shifted with the cold scent of outside rain, and a man's shoes scuffed lightly on the linoleum, never entering the front room, never letting his face be seen in the mirrors. Irina leaned close, combing Marlene's hair with gentle insistence. Marlene stiffened. She hadn't mentioned a party out loud. She'd only thought it privately, while watching the other woman talk about her badge. Yeah, Marlene said carefully. Downtown. Irina's hands paused for the smallest fraction of a second, then resumed. Downtown is broad. You know what I mean. The nicer hotels, the ones with the ballrooms, where everyone wears the same name tags and drinks the same watered wine. It was said like a joke. It didn't feel like one. Across the room, the loud client from last week was back, and she was telling a new story, something about a co-worker's husband working over at the shipyard and how he'd been pulled into something quiet and weird. The stylist laughed, asked a question that sounded like sympathy. Marlene watched Irina's eyes flick. When the back door opened again, it wasn't the dryers that covered the sound. It was the sudden burst of laughter from a stylist at the front, timed, almost surgical. So the hinge's faint squeal disappeared into the noise like it had never happened. And then Marlene saw something that made her throat go dry. A small strip of paper, pale and folded tight as a matchbook, sat under the glass jar of combs on the counter. Irina's ringed finger passed near it, not touching it, only nudging the jar half an inch enough for the folded strip to vanish beneath the base. Marlene didn't know what she'd seen. She only knew it wasn't salon business. She left with her hair perfect and her stomach unsettled, walking back into the Portland drizzle with the sick sensation that she'd stepped into a machine that ran on ordinary people's words, and that the machine had just noticed her noticing it. Marlene tried to forget it the way you forget a bad dream, by staying busy and pretending the unease is just leftover fatigue. But the salon followed her into the week, in small, invasive ways like grit you can't rinse from your hands. On Tuesday, her office phone rang once and stopped. The exact clipped ring that felt less like a missed call and more like a test of whether she'd flinch. On Wednesday, she found her car's windshield wiper lifted a single notch, not raised fully, just cocked an intimate little adjustment that said someone had been close enough to touch her without leaving a mark. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself 100 normal explanations. The problem was that normal explanations didn't stack this neatly. By Friday, she had done what ordinary people do when they sense danger but don't know its shape. She began to change her routine in tiny, embarrassed ways. She left 5 minutes early. She took a different street. She stopped looking over her shoulder because she hated how paranoid it made her feel. Then caught herself listening for footsteps anyway. And then, at lunch, she walked past the salon without going in. The front window reflected the grey sky and the motion of pedestrians, and for a moment she saw only her own face layered over shampoo bottles and curling irons, until a man stepped into the reflection behind her, pausing like he'd paused there before, hands in his pockets, looking at the salon without looking at it. He didn't enter. He didn't follow her. He simply stood as if waiting for a clock only he could see. Marlene kept walking, heart thudding with the humiliating certainty that she had become a dot on someone else's map. That night, she did something she wasn't proud of. She called her older brother into coma, the one who always laughed at her anxieties until they turned out to be real. She didn't say spy. She didn't say KGB. She said, "There's a place in town that feels wrong," and heard herself sound ridiculous. He teased her anyway, then went quiet when she mentioned the one-ring calls, the touched wiper, the way the back door opened only when the dryers were loud. "Could be a scam," he said. But his tone had shifted into the kind of careful neutrality men use when they don't want to scare you over the phone. If you think someone's casing you, don't do anything alone. Don't play detective. You hear me? Marlene promised. Then she broke the promise 30 minutes later. Not out of courage, but out of a stubborn need to make the world add up again. She drove back toward the salon and didn't park near it. She parked 2 blocks away by a hardware store, the kind with a bright sign and windows full of nails and paint places where people could see. From there she walked, hands shoved into her coat pockets, trying to look like someone with nowhere urgent to be. The salon was closing. The neon open flickered off. The bell didn't ring because no one went in. Irina appeared behind the glass for just a moment, turning the lock, and as she pulled the blinds, she glanced down the street, past the traffic, past the normal life, directly toward where Marlene stood in shadow between 2 parked cars, as if she could see through the distance and the dark and the lie Marlene was telling herself. Then the back door opened. Not wide, not welcoming. A slit of darkness. A woman Marlene hadn't seen before slipped out, carrying a plain paper bag, the kind you'd get from a deli. She walked without hurry to the public trash can on the corner, set the bag on top, not inside, and kept going. Marlene's breath stopped, because she'd seen that move before, in a story you tell yourself is too crazy to be real, and because, across the street, the man who had been waiting stepped away from the wall as if cued by a silent metronome and started toward the trash can, with the calm certainty of someone retrieving what already belongs to him. Marlene didn't think. Thinking was what got you killed in movies. What saved you in real life was usually something uglier instinct mixed with shame, the kind of sudden, clumsy refusal to be used. She moved at the exact moment the man stepped off the curb, not running, not making a scene, just walking fast, with her head down, like she'd been meaning to throw something away all along. Her palms were slick inside her gloves. The paper bag sat on the trash can lid like a harmless lunch left over. But the way it had been placed, balanced, deliberate, made it feel radioactive. She reached it first. Up close, it smelled faintly of citrus and hairspray, salon air trapped in paper fibers. The bag was heavier than it should have been for wrappers. She curled her fingers under it, lifted, and in the same motion dropped it into the can, pushing it down hard with the flat of her hand, as if she were annoyed at careless litter. A voice behind her, not shouted, not angry, measured, like he didn't want witnesses. Marlene kept her shoulders loose and turned slowly, forcing a smile that felt like stretching cracked skin. The man was closer than she'd expected, mid-40s, clean coat, hair trimmed, eyes too awake for this hour. He looked like a commuter who'd lost something, but his gaze pinned the trash can like it was a safe. "I believe you threw away my lunch," he said, polite enough to pass, wrong enough to chill her blood. Marlene let herself give the smallest laugh, as if the idea was absurd. "Sorry if it was on the can. I assumed it was trash. I can ask the store inside if they've got lost and found." Her voice didn't quite shake. That scared her more than if it had. His eyes flicked once, fast, down the street, checking angles, checking reflections. Marlene held his gaze and tried to look like someone who didn't understand subtext. Health code, she said, shrugging toward the can. Once it's in there, it's in there. For a fraction of a second, his jaw tightened, a little muscle jumping near the ear. It wasn't rage, it was calculation, how much pressure he could apply without making noise. He stepped half a pace closer, and Marlene caught the faintest scent of cold tobacco on his coat. Open it, he said softly. I'll take it myself. It one cams of the first. That was the moment Marlene understood the trap she'd stumbled into. Not the bag, but her. If she reached into the can and handed it over, she'd become a witness and an accomplice in the same breath. If she refused, she'd become a problem. She leaned back as if offended. I'm not digging through garbage for some stranger's bag. If it matters, buy another lunch. She forced the words out with a brittle cheerfulness that dared him to escalate. The man stared at her, and Marlene saw something she'd never seen on a normal person's face, an emptiness where social emotion should be, a switchboard of decisions without any warmth behind it. Then he exhaled once through his nose, as if conceding a point in a private argument. Fine, he said. He walked away too smoothly, not hurrying, not looking back. That's what made it terrifying. Hurrying would have meant panic. Smooth meant he still had options. Marlene stood frozen until he disappeared into the flow of the street, then forced her feet to move, one step at a time, toward her car. She wanted to drive straight home. She wanted to pretend the bag was just trash again. But her mind kept replaying the way the woman had placed it, the way the man had moved to retrieve it, the way "miss" had sounded like a warning more than a greeting. At the hardware store parking lot, she sat behind the wheel with the engine off and stared at her hands. Ordinary hands, ordinary life. Then her eyes drifted to the public phone booth across the street, one of the last in the neighborhood. Grimy glass, a directory still hanging inside like an artifact. She told herself she was overreacting, and still, she crossed the street and lifted the receiver. Not to call the police? Not yet. That felt too big, too dramatic, too unbelievable. She called the number on a small plaque she'd once noticed at the Post Office Federal Bureau of Investigation, Seattle Field Office, because it was printed in government font, like it belonged to a world where strange things had names. When the receptionist answered, Marlene swallowed, tasting metal. I think, she said, choosing each word like it might detonate. I just interrupted something that wasn't supposed to happen in public. The line went quiet, for a beat, not dead, not dropped, just held, like the person on the other end had covered the mouthpiece with a palm and turned their head to someone else in the room. Marlene stared through the booth glass at a city bus, coughing past the intersection, at shoppers drifting with paper cups, at a world that looked the same, even after you'd touched the edge of something poisonous. Ma'am, the voice returned, still polite, suddenly flatter. Where are you calling from? Marlene glanced up at the street sign bolted to the pole outside, read it twice to be sure. Near, she started, then stopped herself. Names felt like coordinates. A phone booth by a hardware store. I can see. A coffee shop across the street. Do not go home, the voice said, soft but unarguable. Do not drive to your workplace. Do not call anyone else about this. Can you stay where you are for 5 minutes? Her throat tightened. Why? Another pause. The kind that made her picture someone tracing a map with a finger. Because if what you saw is what you think you saw, you're not the only one who noticed you noticed. Marlene's hand clenched around the receiver until her knuckles burned. She tried to sound normal, like someone complaining about customer service. I didn't take anything. I threw away trash. Exactly, the voice said, and that's a choice someone else may want you to undo. Raison d'être. Outside, a sedan rolled slowly along the curb lane, too slow for traffic, its headlights not quite aligned with the road, as if the driver were looking through the passenger side too. It paused near the corner, no turn signal, then continued. Marlene didn't know if it meant anything. Which was the point? Uncertainty was a tool. It kept you obedient. Look at your reflection, the voice instructed. Not the street. Your reflection. Will ever be examps. Marlene obeyed, eyes locking on herself in the booth, glass pale face, hair pinned too tight, mascara smudged. From earlier panic, she'd sworn she didn't feel. Behind her, reflected faintly. The sidewalk moved like a film strip. Tell me what's behind you, the voice said. A couple walking a dog, she whispered. Describe him. Grey cap. Dark jacket. He keeps folding and unfolding the paper like he can't commit to a page. It's not there they are. Okay, the voice said, and Marlene heard a subtle click, another line joining. A second presence. Breathing, then a low murmur, too far from the receiver to parse. The receptionist, if that's what she was, came back. When you hang up, do not walk straight to your car. Walk to the coffee shop across from you. Order something. Sit with a view of the street. If anyone approaches you and mentions a bag, or lunch, or trash, you say, I already spoke to the manager. Do you understand? This is insane, Marlene said, but her voice didn't convince either of them. Insane is taking the same route home every day. The voice replied, almost gently. Insane is assuming your life can't intersect with theirs. Marlene's gaze flicked again to the man with the newspaper. He shifted his weight, small adjustment, then turned one page with careful slowness, as if he'd been waiting for a cue. Her stomach turned cold. 5 minutes, the voice repeated. Then you move. Marlene swallowed, tasting the stale plastic of the receiver. Okay, she breathed. She hung up, and in the sudden absence of that voice, the booth felt less like shelter and more like a display case, transparent, lit from all sides, a place where anyone passing could see her breathing. She stepped out of the booth like she was leaving a confession slowly, keeping her hands visible, forcing her shoulders to stay loose even as her pulse battered her throat. Cold air snapped at her cheeks. The sidewalk noise rushed back in. A car horn, a laugh. The thin jingle of a shop door opening and closing. Normal sound, normal life. Layered over something else. An invisible second track running beneath it. Marlene did exactly what the voice had said. She didn't look straight at the man with the newspaper. She didn't scan the street like a guilty person. She crossed when the light changed, moving with the crowd, letting other bodies become her camouflage. The coffee shop's bell chimed when she pushed in. Too bright, too cheerful. She ordered the first thing she saw, black coffee. No sugar, because choosing felt dangerous now. The barista asked her name. She almost gave her real one out of habit, caught herself, and said, It's not jumped. She took a table by the window. The kind that made you feel safe, because you could see everything, until you realized it also meant everything could see you. She kept her hands around the cup for something to do with them, pretending the heat was the reason her fingers shook. Outside, the man with the newspaper drifted past the booth, slowed, hesitated, then continued as if he'd missed his appointment. A minute later, the same sedan returned, rolling through the intersection again, just a little too slow. It didn't stop this time. It didn't have to. The message was in the repetition. Marlene stared at her coffee until the surface went still. Then, in the reflection of the window, she saw movement behind her. Someone entering the cafe, not lining up, not ordering, walking with purpose, like they already knew where she would sit. The chair across from her scraped the floor. Mind if I sit? A man asked. He was unremarkable in the way that felt deliberate. Early 40s, tan coat, soft hands, eyes that didn't dart. He didn't smile, but his voice carried that practiced calm of someone trained to lower panic in other people. Marlene didn't answer. He set something on the table, not a badge, not a gun, just a folded paper napkin. A plain napkin, like the kind from the salon's break room. On it, written in tidy block letters, "I already spoke to the manager." Her stomach clenched. He'd given her the line before she could use it, proof he was either the person she'd been told to expect or someone who knew the script. "Say it," he murmured, barely moving his lips. Marlene's mouth was dry. "I already spoke to the manager." The man exhaled once, as if that unlocked the next layer. "Good. Don't look at the door. Don't look at anyone. Just listen. My name is Keller. You called the right office. That—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "That wasn't a salon problem." "No," Keller said. He nodded slightly toward the street, still not letting his eyes follow. "That bag you threw away? It wasn't just paper. It was a carrier. They're going to check whether you kept it, whether you showed it to someone, whether you can be leaned on. They don't need to hurt you to win. They just need you scared enough to make one predictable move." Marlene's breath came shallow. "I didn't take anything. I know." Keller's tone stayed level. "Which is why you're useful. You're clean." "Useful," she repeated, and the word felt like a hook sinking into her. Keller slid his hand under the table, not reaching for a weapon, but pulling out a small plastic pouch, clear, sealed, official-looking. Inside was a hair clip. Cheap, ordinary, the kind that could have fallen out of any woman's purse. "I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no," he said. "But if you say no, you go home tonight and hope they decide you're not worth the trouble." Marlene stared at the clip like it might bite. "What do you want me to do?" Keller's gaze finally met hers. "Go back to that salon tomorrow," he said. The next day, Marlene walked back into Lumiere Salon with the same scarf, the same "sorry I'm late" cadence that made her sound like every other woman juggling a job and a life, and a calendar that never stopped biting. Keller's instructions weren't heroic. They were small and brutal. Don't improvise, don't confess, don't try to be clever. Let the clever people do the clever. All she had to do was survive looking normal. The bell over the door chimed. Warm, blow-dryer air and hairspray hit her face like a curtain. "Marlene, you're back. Good. I was hoping you'd come in today." Hoping. The word landed wrong, too eager, too relieved, like a handler confirming a piece on the board had returned to its square. Marlene let herself laugh softly. "I told you." "Right." Diane's fingers moved. Not randomly, but with that same crisp precision Marlene had noticed too late. The first time appointment book opened, pen uncapped, a page turned exactly twice, even though no one had asked her to check anything. Then, from the back, the tall stylist appeared. Marta, hands in gloves, expression kind in the way a nurse's expression can be kind while preparing a needle. "Chair 3, Marta said. Marlene sat, the cape fluttered onto her shoulders. The mirror framed her face, and behind her, the salon turned into a stage where everyone pretended not to watch. Marta draped foils with practiced speed, and as she worked, she asked questions the way she always had, light, friendly, except the questions weren't about Marlene anymore. They were about the world around her. "Still working downtown?" Marta asked, comb sliding close to Marlene's ear. "Same building?" Marlene forced an easy tone. "For now, they keep changing things. Security always a mess there?" Marta's voice stayed soft. "Elevators still slow?" Diane laughed from the front, loud enough to cover the sentence. And Marlene understood the trick. The salon's noise wasn't background. It was a shield, a built-in muffler. Marlene answered like a woman making small talk, but inside she was counting seconds, waiting for the moment Keller had warned her about the handoff that would look like nothing. Marta finished a foil, stepped away, and reached for a product jar on the counter. Her wrist turned just enough to flash the underside of the lid toward the mirror. A dot of red nail polish, perfectly placed, not fashion, a mark. Across the room, a customer stood up too fast, a purse already on her shoulder, as if she'd been waiting for permission to leave. Marta set the jar down beside Marlene's elbow. "Hold this for me? Just a second." It was so ordinary, it almost worked. Marlene lifted the jar with both hands, careful, as if it were heavy, as if she was simply helping. The lid felt wrong, too tight, too new, like it had been sealed for travel, not daily use. She kept her expression empty and turned slightly, the way Keller had shown her, placing the jar back down, but not where Marta wanted. She slid it a few inches closer to the edge, right into the sightline of a small vase of combs by the mirror. A comb in that vase was not a comb. Marlene felt her throat tighten. She wanted to look at the door. The customer with the purse moved, not toward the exit, but toward chair 3, drifting close enough to brush the counter. A brush pass waiting to happen. And then Keller's voice came from somewhere behind the shampoo stations, low and calm, like he'd been there all along. "Ma'am," he said gently. For half a heartbeat, nothing moved. The salon's hum, dryers, chatter. The radio kept going, as if the room itself was trying to pretend it hadn't heard. Then the customer's hand twitched toward the jar. Keller didn't grab her. He didn't shout. 2 men in plain jackets simply appeared where there had been empty space, bodies positioning like doors closing. Diane's smile cracked. Marta's eyes went flat, calculating the distance to the back hallway. Marlene watched herself in the mirror as the world shifted 1 inch and revealed the machinery underneath. No gunfire, no screaming, just a sudden choreography of hands, wrists, pockets, quiet control, swallowing, quiet intent. Keller leaned close to Marlene's chair, not looking at her like a savior, but like a man finishing a job that never gets a headline. "You did exactly what you were supposed to," he murmured. "Go home. Make dinner. Forget my name. It's Gethatov." Marlene's lips parted, 1,000 questions jammed behind her teeth. But Keller was already turning away, voice becoming official, clipped, invisible again. Outside, through the glass, the same sedan rolled past once too slow, then accelerated into traffic and vanished like it had never been there. Marlene sat very still under the salon cape, staring at her own reflection, realizing the worst part wasn't that spies had been in the room, it was that, for a while, they had been comfortable.